Hey there, welcome to the Shattered Mindset Podcast. Wisdom from life's turning points and defining moments. I'm your host, Melvin Larry. This episode didn't come to me sitting at a desk trying to figure out what to say next. It came to me in a moment where I had to pause and really think about what I was feeling because I found myself caught between two very real, very powerful forces: urgency and expectancy. And I tell you right up front, at first, it didn't feel like they worked together. It felt like they were pulling me in two different directions. I had just come off a conference, great conference. It was a wonderful event. And now, you know what those environments can do. You're surrounded by people who are moving, people who are building, people who are talking about what's possible. And when you're in that kind of atmosphere, something happens to you. Okay. You start thinking bigger. You start seeing more. You start feeling like maybe I need to do more. And I felt it. I felt that urgency, not the kind that whispers, but the kind that speaks loud and clear. Move, act, don't wait, take advantage of this. And in that moment, it felt right. It felt necessary. It felt like momentum. But here's where it shifted for me. Not long after that, I had my quiet time. No noise, no crowd, no external push, just stillness. And in that stillness, the message was completely different. It wasn't about just moving fast, it was about living in expectancy. Now, when those two things show up back to back like that, you've got to stop and think, because now you've got one voice saying, move now, and another saying, wait, trust, be still, live in expectancy. And if you don't take a moment to process that, you'll assume they're in conflict. But here's what I realize: they're not in conflict. You just don't always understand how they work together. Because the real issue isn't urgency versus expectancy. The real issue is this: are they aligned or are they working against each other in your life? Let me take you a little deeper into what I started wrestling with, because I had to ask myself a question that I think a lot of us avoid asking. What's actually driving my urgency? Is it opportunity or is it pressure? Look, is it clarity or is it comparison? Is it alignment or is it fear of missing out? Because here's the truth: not all urgency is instruction. Sometimes it's just emotion. And if you've ever come off of a high energy environment, you know exactly what I mean. You walk out of there feeling like, boom, man, I need to change everything. I need to start something new. I need to move on. Just move all of this right now. And it feels productive. It feels like progress. Look, it feels like momentum. But the conference that I attended, it was very high. It just, I was excited, and just, it's a normal thing. I mean, it happens at conferences, it happens from religious experiences and events and so forth. And we're high and we're pumped and we're ready and everything's rushing through our mind. And then the next morning, if it takes that long, the reality sets into that you got to think about this and think about that. And it's not just what happens, but what you have to do to make things happen and to make those situations become a reality in your life. I have to think about it. You have to think about it, and look, and that's when I had to ask myself, was that direction or was that emotion? It's a really sensitive, I mean, serious thing to ask yourself all the time. But let me slow that down for a second, because just because something feels like momentum doesn't mean it's aligned movement. And that's a distinction a lot of people miss. There's a difference between being inspired and being instructed. Inspiration moves you emotionally, instruction moves you intentionally. And when you confuse the two, that's when urgency starts leading you instead of serving you. Okay? Now, let me sit here for a second because this is where it gets real. I've been in situations where I moved on something quickly because it felt urgent. And later on, I had to ask myself, why did I do that? Okay, I jumped on it, I moved on it. It sounded like it may have been good, but sometimes I just had to ask myself, why did I do that? Not because it was obviously wrong, but because it didn't fully align with where I was going. And I know I'm not the only one. Some of you listening right now, look, you've made moves that looked right on the outside, but internally you knew something was off. That's what happens when urgency isn't filtered. And this is where this episode separates itself. Because yeah, we've talked about movement, we've talked about action, we've talked about change, but this is about discernment. Because movement without discernment is just motion. You can be doing a lot and still not be moving forward the way you think you are. Now, let's flip it to the other side because there's another group of people, and you might fall into this one too. These are the ones who talk about expectancy. They believe, they hope, they trust, they say all the right things. But if you're being honest, they're not necessarily moving. Now, don't get me wrong, expectancy is powerful, but expectancy without movement turns into waiting without progress. And now you've got two extremes: urgency without alignment and expectancy without movement. And most people are stuck somewhere between the two. So I had to ask myself, what's missing? And this is what came really into focus for me: reflection. Reflection is what most people skip because reflection requires you to slow down. It requires you to think. It requires you to question what you're feeling. And let's be honest, most of us don't want to do that, okay? Because it's easier to just move or just wait. But reflection does something powerful. It filters your urgency and it grounds your expectancy. Let me say that again. Reflection filters urgency and grounds expectancy. Because urgency says, move now. Expectancy says something is working, but reflection asks, is this the right move right now for me? That question right there, look, it can save you from a lot of missteps because here's the truth: you can be urgent and still be off course. You can be busy and still be misaligned. You can be doing a lot and still not be moving forward. So before you act on urgency, you've got to filter it. You've got to ask, is this mine? Is this for now? Or am I reacting to what I just experienced? That's not hesitation, that's wisdom. Okay? Now, let me say this because I don't want to, be misunderstood. Reflection is powerful, but not all reflection is productive. Some of us say we're reflecting, but what we're really doing is delaying. We're not processing, we're postponing. We're not getting clear, we're getting comfortable. And there's a difference because reflection is supposed to lead to a decision, not replace one. Okay? Now, look, I can remember just when I just waited too long or moved too late on different situations. There's a situation that comes to mind. I have a background in real estate, And a friend of mine who's also in real estate, he talked about a company that was making a stock offering. And I was trying to figure this company out. I was trying to learn about the company, and the stock was really, really inexpensive. Okay. And he talked about it. And I got so focused in looking at the company and things about going what was going on with the company and the ins and out of this and that and distracted from this and distracted to that and everything, that when my I raised my head, the stock price had dropped, it had gone up a a few hundred times. I'm like, for real. I mean, like, it was gone up like crazy. And I was like, what the what? I was trying to jump in, but I mean, listen, it was a bad time. And the thing about it is that when I did do that, I jumped in at the time that it was ready to go back down. All right. So, I don't know. I make I waited too long. And you've heard it said that leaders are decisive. I wasn't decisive in the moment, okay? Leaders are decisive, that's true. But decisiveness doesn't mean you don't reflect. Okay, I was reflecting, but listen, it also means you don't stay there too long, okay? You reflect just long enough. I needed to reflect long enough to move with intention and make a decision, okay? Because at some point, you've got to act, or you miss. You can't think your way into momentum. You can't wait your way into progress. At some point, movement has to happen. And this is where balance comes in. Because just like urgency can be misplaced, reflection can be misused. Misplaced urgency actually leads to reaction. Misused reflection leads to hesitation. And neither one leads to aligned movement. So now we're not just talking about reflection, we're talking about effective reflection. Reflection that leads somewhere, reflection that produces clarity, reflection that results in decision and movement. Now, let's take this a little deeper because I want to unpack expectancy in a way that we don't usually hear. Most people define expectancy like this: I believe something good is going to happen. And that sounds good, but it's incomplete. Because if that belief doesn't show up in how you live, then it's not expectancy, it's just a thought. Real expectancy shows up in your behavior. It shows up in how you prepare, how you respond, how you stay consistent, even when you don't see results. And this is where people lose it. They start with urgency, they feel inspired, they take action, but when results don't show up right away, they slow down or stop. They question. They just stop because their movement is tied to urgency, not sustained by expectancy. And that's why this matters, because urgency might get you started, but expectancy is what keeps you going. Now, let me slow this down again for a moment, because this is where you got to look at yourself really honestly. What happens when things don't move as fast as you thought they would? Do you stay consistent or do you stay questioning everything? Do you keep showing up or do you choose to pull back? Do you stay grounded or do you start chasing something else that feels urgent or another shiny object? Because this is the cycle a lot of people get stuck in: urgency, action, no immediate result, loss of momentum, new urgency, repeat, rinse and repeat. And they stay busy, but they never build traction. So now let's bring it all together. Urgency starts movement. Reflection directs movement. Expectancy sustains movement. If you miss reflection, you'll move fast, but not effectively. If you miss expectancy, you'll start, but you won't stay. If you don't understand urgency, you might never move at all. Now let me touch on something briefly because I think it connects, but I want to keep it grounded. We've all heard phrases about waiting, believing, having faith. But sometimes we misunderstand what that actually looks like. Waiting doesn't mean doing nothing, it means staying ready. Belief doesn't mean sitting still, it means aligning your actions with what you say you expect. Because here's the reality, you can say you expect something, but if your daily actions don't reflect that, there's a disconnect. And that disconnect is where frustration lives. So when we talk about expectancy, we're not talking about sitting back and hoping something happens. We're talking about living like something is already in motion, even if you don't see it. That changes everything. It changes how you prepare, how you respond to setbacks, how long you stay in the process. And it keeps you from chasing every urgent feeling that comes your way. Because now you're not reacting, you're operating with intention. Let me bring this back around. Some of us are moving too fast. I hate to say that. Uh, and we haven't taken the time to ask why, though. Some of us are believing big, but we're not moving at all. And some of us are caught in between, trying to figure out what actually applies to us. Here's what I want to take from this. Not everything that feels a certain way, you know, deserves your movement. And not everything you're expecting is ready yet. So before you move, reflect. Before you wait, examine why. And as you move forward, make sure your urgency and your expectancy, that is, are working together, not against each other, because when they align, that's when things begin to shift. That's when your movement has purpose, when your belief has strength, when your direction becomes clearer. And that's when you stop chasing and start building. So until the next time, keep adapting, keep evolving, and keep reaching for those new horizons. I'll see you the next time on the Shattered Mindset Podcast. Take care, take charge. God bless.